Number 21, financial reports for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2019. For one of her final appearances.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight, I will be presenting you with the final fiscal report for fiscal year 18-19. First, I will review the results of operations during the fiscal year for the general fund and subsequently move on to both the water and the wastewater enterprise funds. This is a summary overview at the highest level of the general fund budget versus actual in millions of dollars, including total revenues, total expenditures, transfers out, the police and fire DIF loan repayments, and the beginning and ending fund balance remaining. The original fiscal year 18-19 budgeted expenses were $42.1 million. To that, we added a total of just under $2.4 million. This included grant-funded appropriations of just under $950,000, prior year purchase order encumbrance commitments of $462,000, strike team overtime for the fire department just under $253,000. This adds to both revenues and expenditures, by the way. The city attorney budget, $130,000. Executive recruiter cost, $85,500, and other items just under $59,000. This brought our total final budgeted expenditures to $44,492,000. Actual expenditures ended the year at $42,953,000, under budget by $1,539,000. This savings includes $511,700 in encumbrance carryovers and $386,000 in grant-funded expenditures that will be carried over and spent in fiscal year 19-20. Therefore, the true amount that we would be under budget could be more accurately described as $641,000. I always like to explain that to you so as not to mislead you and have you thinking that we really netted the year with a $1.5 million savings. The savings was throughout most categories with $674,900 in savings from salaries and benefits. This included $32,000 in applicable grant programs, $454,000 in material supplies and services, and about $24,000 in capital acquisition savings. Oops, I jumped ahead of myself. Back up for just a second. Savings occurred across almost all departments and almost all line items of the budget. I'll show you a breakdown of that in future slides. We ended the fiscal year with an uncommitted fund balance, which meets City Council's priority policy of a 15% reserve of fiscal year 19-20 appropriations. My next several slides will focus on revenues, and then I will transition to expenses. I'm showing you 10 years of history for the top general fund revenues for the city. This is very informative to see the trends over a 10-year period. This is the historical graph of the city's gross sales tax revenues from fiscal year 9-10 through fiscal year 18-19. It shows what occurred with sales tax revenues during the recession. They declined significantly, but began the recovery in fiscal year 10-11. Fiscal year 15-16 includes one-time revenues of just under $824,000 due to the elimination of the state's triple flip. It was the final cleanup payment from the state, so it causes our revenues to look slightly distorted. That was one-time money that wasn't reoccurring. Sales tax continues to be the city's #1 general fund revenue source. At the end of this fiscal year, it represented 32.1% of our total revenues, or almost a third. On a cash basis, sales tax has increased in 13 of the most recent 16 quarters. It has continued to be volatile and very difficult to project. I share the cash basis results because that is what the city actually receives in our bank account and has available to pay our vendors and our employees with. For fiscal year 18-19, we budgeted for a 3% increase. You can't really consider the large double-digit increases that show up here for fiscal year 18-19. That was largely attributable to the CDTFA's computer software conversion. So there was a big lag. That's why we had a 10% drop in the fourth quarter of 17-18. So 18-19 was them trying to catch up and get everything processed, get their systems in place, and pay agencies timely. If you were to average the 18-19 quarterly increases, it comes out to an average increase of 12.25%. I can assure you that that isn't, unfortunately, real dollars. That said, by 19-20, the irregularities should be cleared up. This slide compares the cash basis along with the adjusted basis information as provided by the city's auditors, HDL. They factor out any double up payments, any missing payments, apply everything to the correct quarter based upon the information that they receive from the state. If you were to average out the last 4 quarters or the fiscal year 18-19 quarters, it results in an increase on an adjusted basis of 2.1%. or 0.9% less than what was budgeted. This is a summary of our property tax revenues for the past 10 years. You can see that 18-19 represents an all-time peak for property taxes for the city. The previous peak prior to this was $12.153 million in 07-08. Current revenues far exceed that. Really hard to see. What I'm really wanting you to see here is the trend line right here. And what that shows you is the home sales value, both on a median and an average basis for Yuba City. It shows from 2004 through January of 2019. By looking at the lines on the chart, you can see that home sale prices continued to trend upward through 2018 with a slight dip downward in the first quarter of 2019. We still haven't quite reached the peak prices that existed in 2005. This is the city's franchise fee revenue over the past 10 years. The trend shows a smaller decline during the recession with increases since fiscal year 11-12, albeit small increases in the past 4 years. These are the revenues from the city's recreation programs. Recreation revenues peaked in 08-09 when the Gap facility opened and have been fairly stagnant in recent years, pretty level. This is the city's building permit revenues. It shows the large decline in permit revenues during the recession with a return to a higher level, fairly stable for 3 fiscal years, and then a large increase in 16-17, followed by slightly less in 17-18, and an increase again in fiscal year 18-19. This slide truly shows the volatility and unpredictable nature of building permit revenues. This is the city's business license revenues. They were relatively flat during the recession with growth occurring in every year since fiscal year 10-11. Our hotel motel surcharge revenues. 9-10 was the lowest year historically with recovery in recent years and significant growth in the past 3 years. CSAG has a pattern very familiar, similar to property tax revenues, shows a decline through fiscal year 11-12 and then increases every year through the current year. This is the city's total general fund revenues for each fiscal year. The previous peak for the city was in fiscal year 07-08 at $37.2 million. Then revenues declined until fiscal year 10-11, where they essentially remained flat for 3 years. We saw an increase of $2.3 million in 14-15, just under $1.7 million for 15-16, $1.65 million in 16-17, $2.5 million in 17-18, and $1.4 million in 18-19. I think it's important for council to hear those distinctions in year-over-year changes because clearly the 18-19 increase leveled off to some degree compared to prior years. The fiscal year 18-19 revenues of $44.46 million represents an all-time high for the general fund for the city. And before I transition to discussing our general fund expenses, are there any questions as it relates to our revenues? This shows you the citywide total expenditures for salaries and benefits combined. Previously, salaries and benefits were the highest in fiscal year 08-09 and then declined due to the furlough programs. Citywide expenditures have been increasing since fiscal year 12-13 and would be higher than they are shown here if not for vacancies that occur through attrition throughout the city. As an example, in June 2017, the total amount budgeted citywide for positions which were vacant but were going through the various stages of the recruitment process was just over $5.2 million, with the general fund share being $4.2 million. In July 2018, the number of citywide vacancies had dropped to a total of 29 and a budgeted total of just over $3.2 million, with the general fund share being about $2.2 million. By February of 2019, there were only 22 citywide vacancies valued at just over $2.6 million, with a general fund total of $1.26 million. So it's dropped markedly. This is just salaries. It doesn't include any benefits. Shows you all of the regular full-time city employee costs plus overtime and extra help wages. The trend of this graph is very similar to that of the previous chart for salaries and benefits. The next one will show you a different trend. This is the total citywide cost of employee benefits. You can see there was a small decline during the recession when furloughs were in place. But look at the increase in fiscal year 13-14. This is even with the vacancy savings that I just talked about. It is clear that employee benefits have increased at a rate higher than employee wages. Please note that the 18-19 amount shown includes $750,000 for the supplemental unfunded actuarial liability payment that was made by the city in September 2018. Without that discretionary payment, the total cost of citywide employee benefits would still have been $13.64 million. Still a significant increase. This is the city's retirement costs. The increasing and decreasing trend lines here somewhat mirror that of the previous slide for total employee benefits because retirement is the largest component of employee benefit costs. I also want to note that this slide shows a decline in fiscal year 15-16 in total retirement costs. That's due to the payoff of that's due to vacancy savings. If not for vacancy savings, it would have been much higher. The decline in 17-18 is because the city made its final payment on our pension obligation bonds in fiscal year 16-17. So it dropped off considerably in 17-18. It increased significantly in 18-19. That's both due to increasing CalPERS costs as the discount rate lowering is implemented and the additional discretionary payment of $750,000 that's included in that. Without the additional discretionary payment, the total retirement cost shown here for fiscal year 18-19 would have been $7.75 million. Still significantly higher than previous years. This next slide shows you retirement costs without the pension obligation bond included in any of the years. I pulled out the debt service payment to show you the true cost of what historical payments to CalPERS have been. And again, the 18-19 does include the $750,000 additional discretionary payment. This shows you what percentage of general fund expenditures were expended for fiscal year 18-19. The purple line is the amount of actual expenditures. The yellow line remaining over here on this side is the percentage that was unexpended at fiscal year end. So for salaries and benefits for 18-19, we expended 97.9% of total expenditures. That was significantly higher than what it's been in previous fiscal years. We've had a lot more vacancy savings in prior fiscal years. Working backwards, just to give council a feel for what those were, beginning with fiscal year 17-18 and going back from that. Prior years, the amount of salaries and benefits expended were 91.6%, 92.4%, 94%, 93.8%, 95.7%, and going way back, 97.8%. So we've been at about the same ratio we hit in 18-19, but the years in between, it was significantly more in savings from vacant positions. That said, that savings is one-time in nature. We can't reprogram it or spend it for other purposes. During those years where we had significant budgetary savings from vacancies, the money was squirreled away in the city's general unallocated CIP fund to do infrastructure improvements. As I mentioned earlier, the savings generated from vacant positions for this fiscal year 18-19 was about $675,000. For 17-18, it was $2.7 million, so significantly less. For the current year, 94.9% of materials, supplies, and services were expended, and overall for the general fund, 96.5% of all total general fund expenditures were expended. This shows you the city's total general fund expenses, shows the declines during the recession with expenses being relatively flat from fiscal year 10-11 through 13-14 and increasing each year since with an all-time high reached in 18-19 of $42.95 million. This slide shows you the budgetary savings on a department-by-department basis. All general fund departments, with the exception of the city attorney budget unit and the fire department, returned a portion of their budget as unspent. The total amounts unexpended at the end of the year are just over $1.53 million before reducing that amount for encumbrances and grants that'll carry over to next fiscal year. This slide compares revenues and expenditures total in millions on a citywide basis for just the general fund, with revenues being in purple and expenditures being in yellow. The surplus has changed over time. In fiscal year 13-14, it was the first year we had a surplus since the recession. At that time, it was $645,000. The surplus increased to $1.81 million in fiscal year 14-15. $1.75 million in 15-16, $1.62 million in 16-17, $2.17 million in 17-18, and then down to $1.51 million in 18-19. If there's questions on the expenditures, I'd be happy to take them now. Okay. I'll move on to water and wastewater then. This is the highest level summary of the water fund's budget versus actual expenditures and revenues. Operating revenues came in almost 1.9% more than budget. Water sales were $332,600 more than budgeted. And reviewing the underlying reason why, consumption was 3.2% lower than what it had been in the previous fiscal year, but revenues were up 7.1%. This makes perfect sense since there was a 10% increase in water rates effective July 1st, 2018. Capital connection fees exceeded budget estimates by $11,700. Operating expenditures ended the year $1.3 million, or about 12.8% under budget. The savings occurred in many categories, including $633,000 in salaries and benefits, $106,000 in special equipment O&M, $54,000 in building and facilities O&M, $159,000 in chemicals, and $392,000 in water purchases. Each year, finance looks at this summary, which is called our debt coverage ratio. Our bond documents require us to keep this ratio at least 1.2%. In the calculation preparation, we take total revenues, including capital connection fee revenues, and subtract operating expenditures to get net revenues. This amount is then divided by the total debt service amount to get a ratio, and as I indicated, we must maintain that at 1.2%. It was fairly low in fiscal year 16-17 at 1.61%. It increased to 2.41% and then 2.55%, and for fiscal year ended 18-19. And the amount budgeted, the ratio is 2.13 for 19-20. This is a summary of the city's wastewater fund, budget versus actual, again at the highest level. Operating revenues ended the year about 5.7% higher than budgeted, or $935,000. The utility billing service charges exceeded budget estimates by $541,000. Septage charges were less than budget estimates by $68,000, and investment income was just under $455,000 higher than budget. That was about half of that was attributable to investment earnings on bond proceeds that we're still holding on to. We're paying out over time based upon the improvements based upon our bond sale. So that came in a lot higher than what staff expected when we put together the budget. Overall, capital connection fee revenues were $35,600 higher than budgeted. Operating expenditures were at 93.3% of the amount budgeted. The savings equated to $755,000. Of that, about $360,000 was in salaries and benefits. $310,000 was overexpended for heat and power. $361,000 in savings for professional services. $76,000 for dues and subscriptions. $180,000 for special equipment O&M. $54,000 for buildings and facilities O&M, and $303,000 for chemicals. This slide is similar to what I showed you for the water fund. This is for the wastewater fund. Again, takes total revenues, subtracts the operating expenditures, gets net revenues, and takes a ratio of that to show you the debt coverage ratio, going from 2.61 and 2 years ago to 2.62 for the current year. And based upon the 19-20 budget, we have a ratio of 1.77. With that, I will answer any questions. Okay, then please note and file my report. Thank you very much.
Any member from the public care to comment on anything? Nope, you're safe. Thank you very much, Robin. That took a lot of work. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.